is Stephanie Wagner, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer at the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. And I'm very excited that you're all here today. I think we have some excellent information to share. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the Milwaukee Jewish Federation, even though that's kind of what I do for a living. But I would just say that in a sentence that we're a lot like United Way, but focused on the Jewish community. And you know, why are we hosting this workshop? It's because we saw a need in the Jewish community and are aware that it's in the general community for people to build some basic grant writing skills, as a lot of people are trying to find new and more ways of getting money during the pandemic. Essential funding is sort of shifting, and the funds that we all have been relying on not necessarily is available. I want to remind you that this is Grant Writing 101, so we're going to be covering the basics. So those of you, some of you may be more familiar, but I think that there's still good, very, very good tips that our presenter will share. For those of you who are thinking about applying to the Milwaukee Jewish Federation for funding, I just want to be very, very transparent that we typically fund historic partners, and we very rarely have regular grant cycles. I can tell you though, if you would like us to, we can add your name to what is really the one open grant cycle that we do every year. So Emily is our presenter, and I'm going to chime in occasionally through the presentation to present the funder's perspective, because the way this is being presented, the way that Emily has crafted this, is that it's really about what the funder wants to hear, because it's not about what we want to say as much as what the funder is absorbing about your organization. So we will be sending a recording as well as Emily's presentation and a couple other tools that she's sharing with us in an email, either later today or on Monday morning. And finally, I'm just going to ask everybody to, if you have a question, please put it in the chat. And if it's something that I can answer in the chat, I'll do that. And if it's something that we are going to want Emily to address, she'll do that. So that's pretty much where we are. Now I'd like to introduce Emily, our wonderful grant writer and presenter. Emily's a consultant and a fundraising professional. She specializes in grant writing and grants management, and has 30 years of experience as a nonprofit executive. She's conducted grant training and workshops like this for a bunch of different organizations, including the Association of Fundraising Professionals. She is skilled with writing grant templates, letters of intent, grant proposals to a wide variety of funders like private, community, and also corporation foundations like Northwestern Mutual, Chase Bank, Beta Philanthropies, and the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. Emily is a former Peace Corps volunteer and brings a great cross-section of different cultural and global understanding and awareness to her work. She has a master's degree from UW Milwaukee in sociology and international development, and she is a certified fundraising executive. So welcome to Emily, and why don't we get started?
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm excited to be here with everyone today. It's, I think, going to be a lot of fun, and you might not think of fun when you think of grant writing and writing proposals, but it really is an excellent and awesome way to communicate your message and to communicate your mission to funders and get the word out about all the good work that you do. So Kate is also on the line and is going to be advancing the slides for me today. So thank you so much, Kate. And our objectives today are going to be for you to gain more of a familiarity with the purpose of grants from the organization and the funder standpoint. And it's important to be able to think about grants in terms from both perspectives, because you're knee deep in the work as nonprofit professionals. And so it's important to think about, okay, how is the funder looking at this? How are they looking at the program? How are they looking at this organization? And how can I really speak to their impact that they would like to make in the community? Then also just understanding the main components of a strong proposal or letter of intent. We'll talk about what's the difference between a proposal and letter of intent. And I also use the terms template, and we'll talk about that and why those are important, as well as an executive summary. And then learning tips and techniques for drafting an executive summary. So I just want to start off with a question. If any of you would like to either raise your hand or put something in the chat about what you think the main purpose of writing a grant is. I see the first is from Stephanie, to get money. Okay. And we have a few other things too. Great. Tammy is saying to educate potential donors about your agency and need and begin a stewardship relationship. Awesome. Brittany is saying allow donors to support causes they care about, but also that benefit your org. Awesome, thank you. Molly is saying develop relationships. So it's really, and Levy is saying funding, but also sharing your mission and able to advance your goals. So you guys are spot on because it's really both. We think of grants as, okay, the ask. Like if you're gonna do an individual ask, you wanna ask for funding. But that's really one small part of a very effective grant. Really, the main purpose is to share information about your organization with funders who want to make an impact in the community, who want to help you, and to be able to share with them effectively so that they are on board and working with you as a partner. So it's really about establishing relationships when we write a grant proposal and we submit it, because there's lots more than the actual submission, which we'll touch on a little bit today. So basically, if you keep that perspective in mind, it's not just about the ask right now. It's about your future with that funder. And if funders like you, they get to know you, they follow you along, which they will, and they'll track what your outcomes are and how you're doing and how your program is achieving results, then they're gonna be even more invested and want to invest and partner with you. So why a grant template? Really, when I talk about a grant template, it's about the structure. A template is not something you're going to submit, but a template helps you draft a proposal. And it can also help you draft something that's a little bit shorter, like a letter of intent. But for the purposes today, we're going to talk about a full proposal. So think of a template as a shell. And it can provide you with a lot of consistency. If you create grant templates for, say, one particular program or an unrestricted ask, then you can use that template throughout the year. And this is what I've done in my career, is create a grant template at the beginning of the year for different programs, and then be able to tweak it throughout the year with new numbers and new stories, and change the messaging if the marketing messaging has changed and evolved for the organization throughout the year. So it helps you achieve consistency. It's very efficient. I think if anyone in this group has gone after grants before, you've probably all run into very urgent deadlines where you have maybe a week or 2 weeks to create something and submit it. And if you have to keep starting from scratch, that's using way too much energy and time. Transparency. It really helps you to achieve transparency with funders because you're creating objectives and things that you're going to measure, and you're communicating those in your grant proposal. And we'll get into some examples around that. Due to things like COVID, and what do you do when a program is struggling and due to circumstances beyond your control. But in that template, you can create that message of transparency that you're communicating to the funder. This is what we're dealing with currently, and this is where we want to go and what we want to achieve. So you can lay all that out in a template. Then it ensures accuracy. If you have to recreate something over and over, it's easy to leave off information. I've found that myself in an organization where the messaging and the marketing communications might change during the year, and then it's easy to leave that off, and you don't want to go with old information. And then you're ready, like I mentioned. So creating a grant structure or grant template is really, I think, very useful and very time efficient. So let's start off with the basics. There's a lot of things to put in place, but if you set these areas of information, I'll call them, if you set these up in the beginning and you're organized around it, you can save yourself a lot of headaches when it's time to submit a proposal. You want to create a good impression with a funder. Funders don't want to see you submit a few things that they asked for, but not everything. So one of the first things that's super important is to know the funder's priorities. So for example, say you're going to submit a proposal to Bader Philanthropies. You need to know what are their areas of interest, and does your program area mesh with that? Is it aligned with their priorities? Super important. If you're an arts organization and you don't want to, they don't support the arts, then you need to not go to Bader Philanthropies. You need to make sure that you understand your funder. So do a little bit of research around what their giving priorities are. And I would even suggest talking with them during this time when things are so in flux, because their priorities may have shifted a bit and their funding capability may have shifted a bit. It may have gone up, it may have gone down. You don't know until you pick up the phone and you start talking with them. So that kind of gets all into the relationship part as well. What I like to do when I'm starting a new proposal is to work backwards with your deadline in mind. One of the things that we'll send out after the presentation is a sample grants calendar. And I always use a grants calendar, and I start with the proposal deadline first, and then categorize it by quarter. So say October, November, December submissions are coming up. You want to start plugging in your priorities for that quarter. and then what are the deadlines? So for example, going again back to Bader Philanthropies, they happen to have their next deadline is December 17th. And so if you intend to go to them with a request and they happen to fit your program areas and you fit theirs, and it seems like a really good opportunity, you might want to put them on your calendar for December. So I've always found working backwards to be really, really helpful, because there's so much that usually needs to be done. You don't want to start with today's date and then at the end be scrambling around for stories and so on. So again, check out the funder priorities, review their 990. If anybody is not familiar with GuideStar, you can go to guidestar.org and you can sign up for an account. It's free, and it's a great resource to check out the 990s of funder organizations. And it will tell you several things that are important. It will tell you the funding year that they go by. So for example, Bader Philanthropies, their funding year starts in September and ends in August. So their December review time or deadline is probably their first review of their new budget year. So that's a great time to be able to apply to them because typically funders have more in their budget at the beginning of their fiscal year than towards the end. And it will also tell you, you know, at the top of the 990, it will say what their fiscal year is. So it could be January through December, could be July through June. Very useful to know. It will also tell you that what organizations they give to and how much they typically give. Now I would say there's a caveat to that, again, this year their giving may have shifted. It's important this year that you really get on the phone to funders before you submit, and to find out as it's still on track with what their typical funding priorities are and what a reasonable amount might be for your request. Share with them about your program and just start that relationship. Then you also want to, you know, start gathering your financial documents, your organization's audit, your organization's 990, because you'll get asked for that a lot. Your P&L, maybe, that's your profit and loss sheet. They may want to see that, may not. Your operating budget, generally want to see your overall organization budget, as well as your program or project budget. And then your tax ID, your 501c3 registration document, things like that. So have all that in one folder, have it electronically. Then you want to do your research. You want to do what is your needs assessment, what is your statement, and we'll get into these kind of components of the proposal. So you can create separate documents for some of these that you might want to have on hand, like you have your mission statement as a separate document. You have your needs data as a separate document, things like that. Then you don't have to hunt through a previous proposal to find your research and your data and your current mission statement and things like that. Impact data. You want to have stories and successes. And I can't stress enough how early you want to get on about stories, just like your data. And sometimes with data, it comes down to the wire because you may not have outcome information until, you know, you want to give them the most current outcome information. And say you want to apply to them Bader again in December, you might want to wait until third quarter information is available. So July, August, and September outcome data. So then in October, November, you want to be reaching back out to your program staff and see what kind of up-to-date information they have. So, and in other words, you may submit in December, you're not going to have end of year 2020 data yet. But if they require that, you could say, we'll get this to you in early 2021 as soon as we have it. And you can email them and make sure that's okay. I've done that a lot with funders, and they're usually okay with that. They understand how your your year works and what you can report on and what you can't yet. So then you also want supporting docs, you want newsletters, you want photos and brochures if you are allowed to submit those. So be really careful about what they require and what they're allowing. A lot of proposals won't accept newsletters or brochures. So check the guidelines, super important. Staff bios and job descriptions. If you're asking for support for positions that help run the program, you've got to have your job descriptions of staff. Your organization's strategic plan. Funders often want to see that, or they at least want to know some of that. So how are you adapting to COVID, and how are you going to address not only gaps in funding, but how are you going to address the program enhancements and achieving your program goals in the new year? And then program goals and impact reports. So again, from your program staff, what can you gather in the most recent quarter before you submit? And all of this is usually what I have done in the past is to create a grants folder on the internal drive. And then I create by year. And then within that, I'll have funder subfolders. So I'll create, for example, grants, and then 2020, and then Bader Philanthropies. And then there's all the documents for Bader that were submitted, including a confirmed proposal, so that you have that confirmation from the organization. Now, a lot of this could easily go into an admin folder. So I would recommend you create an admin folder as well. You could create something called financials, whatever works for you, but make it easy on yourself. Create something streamlined where you're not always hunting and searching for previous documents, and you've got the new documents. Like I said, you've got the new annual report. If the mission statement has been revised, you've got the new version of that. So anytime you get new information, make sure you've got the most recent. When the new 990 comes out, most 990s are 2018 right now. But when the 2019 comes out, make sure you've got that in your folder. Okay, structure for success. So basically, this is how you want to create your template. And, some of these words people use interchangeably, but today I'm going to talk about template as the structure. Then the proposal you can think of as a full proposal. So it could be 4 pages, it could be 10 pages, it's whatever the funder is requiring. Letter of intent is typically 1 to 2 pages, and the difference with a letter of intent is it's an introduction for the funder to your organization. So for example, you want to go after unrestricted funding, and the funder says, we don't accept unsolicited, unrestricted proposals, but you would like them to get to know you and you want to get to know them. It's not a bad idea to send an introductory letter. And in that case, I would not include your ask in the letter, but just kind of introduce yourself. Sometimes funders will ask for a letter of intent first. And in that case, if they're asking for a letter of intent and they're accepting proposals, then I would include the amount and what, specific to the amount of funding that you're asking for. And then executive summary. Executive summary is part of your full proposal, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So your structure of your template should really include some very standard sections. Should include your organizational history, your executive summary, your needs assessment, which basically talks about you illustrating the need, your program description or project design, your goals and objectives, your evaluation, how you're going to measure what you're doing, your sustainability plan, so how are you going to sustain that program beyond this funder, and then budget and narrative, so your program or project budget with narrative explaining your costs.
Emily, do you want to pause and see if anyone has any questions?
Sure.
Okay, I guess nobody has any questions. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. All right, so organizational history is really the purpose of your organization. When was your organization founded? What has it intended to do? What purpose did it serve in and has served in the community? What was the need? So basically, before your organization existed, what need is it filling? Is your mission around serving at-risk teens? And there was no organization in your community doing this. And there were instances of teen runaways and absenteeism from school and teens asking for mental health help. Or was there an incidence in vandalism and teens not having any place to go after school? So what was the need and what is your story around your organization? Just the basics. When was it incorporated? What is your mission statement? What is your vision, if you have a vision statement? What makes your organization unique? If there are other organizations doing something similar, what is it that makes your organization stand out? So that's what you want to include in this section. So let's get to the executive summary. This is going to be an important part of your full proposal. And some of this you may have, it's likely that you're going to have specific questions when you do your proposal that the funder is asking for. So some of this may not stay in an executive summary. It may be put under other questions that the funder asks you, and that's fine. But if you put this together, you've got all that information. And then you can just pull it out. So in this section, you want to be really concise. Say half a page to 1 page for all of this information. So that means probably 1 to 3 sentences answering each question. So first off, who are you? Again, you can go back to your organizational history. What do you propose to do? What is your program? And how does that align with the funder priorities? So again, you want to link what you're doing to what the funder's interests are. And you can include short-term and longer-term needs here. Like, for example, we intend to scale up in 3 years and expand this program to other counties. Again, keep it succinct, but you can include short-term and long-term needs. And just another note about If you do talk about scaling up, then I would suggest doing, year 1, year 2, year 3, and showing that. You don't want to look like, okay, in next year, in 2021, we're going to achieve 75% participation rate. And then after that, we're going to scale up to 3 counties. You want to make it look like, you've really got a plan in place, and scaling up is going to be determined by how your outcomes are being achieved. So who will your program and project serve and your impact? Who's the focus? Is it at-risk teens again, for example? Is it 4th grade students? Don't hesitate here to mention the impact of COVID on your programs and your project. So for example, and we'll get again to this under objectives and goals, but if you took a real hit in your programs in being able to serve your constituents, and you were not able to reach your goals in 2020, you want to explain that, and you want to explain what your path is going forward. What community need are you addressing? And so maybe, go ahead.
Jump in here? So you should know that funders tend to understand, they want you to succeed, which is why they're giving you the money. And they tend to understand why things might shift or change. So don't be afraid to, they like transparency, and don't be afraid to say all these different things that Emily is saying. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you understand your organization and the project that you're proposing.
Exactly. Thank you, Stephanie. Funders are going to appreciate that your honesty and your transparency, and they're going to feel even more invested with you to know what your plans are. And did I hear somebody else say something? Okay, guess not. And also, because everything has changed so much this year, you may be uncovering new needs in your program that you never had thought about before. You may need more support in terms of technology and equipment. You may need more support in terms of safety and sanitation. So you want to be able to be adaptable in what you're communicating, and the funder is going to want to see that, and how robust your plans are to deal with all these changes. So again, what community need are you addressing? Why is it that you think this is important? What gives you as an organization the strength to be able to address these needs? How will you evaluate the success of the program? We'll get into that. What is your timeline? Who will be your key collaborators? So for example, a few years ago, I did a proposal when I was at Goodwill, and we were partnering with Sojourner Family Peace Center when they were launching their new facility and creating all kinds of wraparound services. And we partnered with them to create a joint proposal to have employment and job resource personnel on site at the new center. And these were Goodwill employees that would be funded through this grant to the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And so we did this as a partnership with Sojourner, and we did a joint proposal. We did a joint on-site visit so that they could see behind the scenes. This is what Sojourner is doing, and this is the role that Goodwill is going to be playing. So if you have partners, think about that and be able to describe that. And then what will you need to implement your program project? So this is where you put that in about, this is what we need. We need $25,000 to be able to enhance this program if it's a continuing program. or $25,000 or $50,000 to launch this program. And what is it, a little bit about what it's going to go for. But again, remember, no more than one page for your executive summary. Keep it very succinct, and you're going to be able to take parts of that out and put that into your proposal, and this will give you really a great document to be able to use. Did you have any other thoughts, Stephanie?
Yeah. A tip for how to write this, how to write in general, but especially something like this that has to be really succinct, is to just write it all out the way you want it to be, and then chop it up. So you just get everything out there that you want to say, figure out where you can get rid of certain sentences, where you can combine sentences, where you have extra words or you're saying something twice or whatever. The other thing is, my favorite part of this slide is a little piece in the corner that says be concise, 1/2 to 1 page. And what I want to point out is that it's really important that you use a normal font size, normal spacing, and normal margins. As a funder, to get something that is like, goes all the way to the margins, is, very small font size. It just makes the funder frustrated because they want to read what you're putting together, but it's such a chore to do it. And it also indicates that there's far more language than is needed to explain what you're doing. So it's as I said at the beginning, we want to think about what the funder wants, and the funder wants short, concise, and legible. I know that sounds silly, but a normal font size, normal margins, and normal spacing. That's it.
That's great advice, Stephanie. And I was actually going to mention that as well, and I'll just reinforce it, that you want to, be really faithful to the guidelines that the funder provides. So if they're asking for 11-point font size, or not font size, but 11-point size, stick with that. And if they're asking for Times New Roman font, stick with that. And if they give you guidelines on margins, stick with that. And again, with character limits and word limits, which is very common, make sure that you're always reviewing that.
Can I just give another tip that just popped into my mind? Is often, proposals are submitted through a program online, and many times I've lost the content, even though there's usually an opportunity to save it. So what I do is, when I'm seeking funding, is I will write everything out in a Word document and save it, make sure it's perfect, and only then copy and paste it into the software that the organization is using to evaluate the proposals. It will just save you a lot of headache, and it will also save you from submitting an incomplete proposal inadvertently.
Thank you, that's great. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about reviewing your work as well. So then, needs assessment. And really what this is illustrating the need. So you need to be able to show the funder in several different ways why you need this support, and why you need to grow this program and the importance of this program. So you want to illustrate that through data. So the example here I have is using data to illustrate the need. 85% of the students we serve are enrolled in the free and reduced lunch program. 25% of the families in our district live below the federal poverty level. So you've got a couple data points in there about the students that you want to impact in this program and where they're at. And you also have a little bit bigger picture of the families in the school district. And the economic and income level of those families really shows why you have so many students who are enrolled in the free and reduced lunch program. So make it very short, make it very sweet. No need to, explain a lot. So then you also want to share a story to illustrate the impact. If you can, if you've got room. Again, sometimes you don't have room for a story, but you could, if you don't have room for a bigger story, you could do a quote from a participant or a parent of a participant, or I've done stories from siblings of participants as well. And that's all really effective as well. And sometimes, if you're talking about students and you're talking about minors, it can be really difficult to get permission to share their story. And if you can't get something from a student, you can get it from the parent or the grandparent or a sibling who's over 18, and how the program has impacted the entire family. So gather your stories, like I said, and testimonials early in the grant process. If it's a new program and you don't have any success stories to share yet, you can get statements from people who are interested in the program or requesting the program, saying, this is why we need this program, and this is what it's going to do. So don't worry that you don't have successes yet. You can get statements from interested stakeholders that you can share as well. And this really gets to the emotional component of illustrating your program, which is really important. Both of these are important, and you can always argue, is data more important or stories more important? I think they work well together, and you really need both. So another example is, say you're applying for, there's hunger in the community, there's food insecurity, and a lot of people can relate to that right now while we're struggling in a pandemic. And you want to be able to show some cause and effect. How does that impact children's well-being? Can they study well in school if they're hungry? Are they showing up to school? Are they paying attention and be able to focus in school? So how is food insecurity impacting their learning and their ability to really progress? Those are the things that you want to help illustrate when you talk about the need. Then yeah, go ahead.
I'm not just interrupting, Emily. This is part of what we had planned to do, so I'm not just being rude. One of the things that I think is important is to ask yourself, so what? Because if you ask yourself, so what enough, you will get to the nugget. So here's an example. We recently gave funding to some schools and camps to put tents up outside. And the reason they needed to do that is because they, let's say it was a preschool or, summer camp for very young children. The need is not, the need is that they needed more space to be able to expand their program so they could do social distancing. If they didn't have more space through a tent, they wouldn't be able to serve as many students. So you think that that's what the need is, and it is to create extra space to enable social distancing. But really what the need is parents needing to be able to have a safe environment for their children so they could go back to work. And the ultimate need is for the children to be able to learn and to socialize during this pandemic. So it is accurate to say that the need is to help expand the footprint of the school, but just keep asking yourself, so what? So what? So why do we need to expand the footprint? And ultimately, you may get to a more important nugget that you want to share. Is that accurate, Emily?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is to keep asking yourself, over and over, why? Why do we need this? Why is it important? Um, Great example. And then one more tip I have on this one is, if possible, include regional and state trends if you have them. For example, I did a grant proposal a few years ago for a school, and it was for STEM support at the high school level. And schools have to report on their MAP scores to the state in order to be eligible for funding. And MAP scores are measures of academic performance. All schools have to be able to do that. And so you want to be able to show your program, for example, STEM, is going to help enhance learning and opportunities for high schoolers to achieve better progress, better understanding, better knowledge, better skills in areas of engineering and math and so on. So, and how is that going to help them achieve their goals as individuals as they build their own toolkits for the future and look forward to college or a 2-year college, 4-year, and so on. So you want to think about small picture, but you want to think about big picture too. And so it's helpful to take a step away and say, how is this really going to improve our students' lives? And again, doesn't need to be a lot of information, but it's good to mention, and funders will appreciate that bigger picture that you're answering in terms of their overall, say, academic achievement if it's about students. So here is really where you want to focus on program description, project design. What is your program? What's the purpose? What's the need? What's the target audience, or who is the target audience? What is the design? Is it an after-school program that is going to focus on athletics? Say you're going to build a soccer field and a basketball court, and the students that you serve in your school are in an underserved area of the community, and there's really no other facility nearby in the district that is served. And so you want to be able to create this after school space for them, and you're going to need personnel to staff that. You're going to need to create this outdoor space, these opportunities for soccer and basketball and things like that. So what is it going to look like? And then your true costs. You want to build in absolutely true costs. Don't be afraid to put in overhead here, because, and again, check your funder guidelines. This is a point where you may want to ask them if, can we include overhead, and should we, if they don't stipulate that in their guidelines, because you can't really run your programs if you can't keep the lights on, and you can't keep the internet going, and you can't sanitize and keep everybody safe, and you can't pay the bills. So make sure you have all your costs built in. Then what are the resources that you're going to need? You're going to need equipment. You're going to need construction help. You're going to need staffing, and so on. Then sustainability. You're going to need to show, how are we going to continue this offering that we're going to do, this after school program after or besides the funding that we get from, say, Bader Philanthropies. And again, personnel should be built into your true costs. Sometimes they want that broken out, which is fine, but just make sure that you've got the personnel in place who's going to be running that program for you.
I'd like to make a couple other comments about that.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't include the true costs, even if you're not asking for funding for it, but you omit them, it makes the funder think you don't necessarily have a grasp on what's happening because they know you need overhead. They know that you need certain things. So follow their guidelines, but don't intentionally omit that stuff, thinking, oh well, I'll get a better opportunity for funding if we don't spend stuff on those things. Follow the guidelines, but be comprehensive so it doesn't look like you don't know what you're doing. The other thing, when talking about a target audience, this is going to be vague advice, but you don't want to be too general and you don't want to be too narrow. If it's too narrow, um, I just remember I was doing grant evaluations for Susan B. Komen, and they had such a narrow target audience that it was like unicorns. Like this one organization would never ever be able to meet the numbers of people that they wanted to reach, given the very, very narrow audience. And the same goes for having too wide of an audience. So it's just another tip that I would keep in mind. Emily, are, is what I said, I mean, do you concur with what I said about the costs, that even if they're not funding it, that you,
Absolutely. You don't want to be stuck submitting something and then you haven't built in some of the real cost, and then it can't be used, the funding can't be used for other things that you should have included. It's always better to include as much as you can, and then the funder has a more accurate picture of what this is going to cost, and how much they want to invest and how much they can invest. So I absolutely, that's spot on. And, really the point about too narrow is really important too, because if you get your scope a little bit, too focused, you're going to be limited in terms of, what you can use that funding for. Now, in some instances where things are really unusual, like this year, um, you want to you go to your funder and you say, our program really needs funding. Um, we got this grant for this year, but we've got these new needs. Can we use some of the funding for these new needs, like new technology? We need additional glass barriers and separation between staff and the youth that we're serving. We need to be able to, create this 6 feet of separation now, and we weren't anticipating that. And often funders will be, they'll be flexible. They'll be okay about that. But if you do that in a year where things are fairly back to normal, or you do it, repeatedly, it's just going to make you look like you don't know, you haven't thought through everything that you need to think through. So, good idea not to make it too narrow of a request. So, goals and objectives. And I typically like to go with SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're timely. So keep it simple. An example I put here is we intend or propose to increase the reading scores of a minimum of 75 of Brown County's third grade students by 25% during the 2020-21 school year. So that is an objective because it's measurable. And I just want to touch on the difference because it can be really confusing at this point, where you're talking about objectives and outcomes and goals and outputs and, what is the difference between all these things? A goal is really more visionary. It's overarching themes or aims, statements that describe skills and competencies. So for example, let's say you've got a fourth grade class. 80% of your fourth graders have an on-time homework assignment completion rate. Kids are notorious for not wanting to do homework. You've got 20% who are not completing their homework on time. That's a problem. It's a problem for the students. It's a problem for the teachers being able to reach those measures. It's a problem for the school in terms of reporting their MAP scores. So how do you get around that? How do you deal with that chronic problem? Say you want to go, you want to deal with that lack of homework completion, having a negative attitude about homework, lack of understanding of the importance. Your goal might be all fourth grade students will build good study habits, improve their ability to focus, and reading comprehension. So those are things that are broader statements that you're not going to specifically measure. Your objectives are things like the example I have on the screen. All fourth grade students will improve their assignment completion, achieving 90% completion by the end of the 2021 school year. So this is what you want to measure. And you can put objectives in for year 1, year 2, if you're going out that broad. That's fine. Then outcomes. What are outcomes? Well, outcomes are changes, behavior, attitudes, perceptions, knowledge. So in this case, when we're talking about homework, Brown County fourth grade students will demonstrate an understanding of the importance of homework assignments and completing them, how that reinforces learning. Students will demonstrate abilities to comprehend assignments by communicating the tasks that they were asked to do, showing their work, and completing assignments. And specific measures can be put in place, but those are really your outcomes, is that students' understanding and comprehension is increased. They're showing their work, they're completing assignments, they're communicating the tasks that they were given. And outputs. What's an output? This is another kind of confusing term. So that can be tangibles from your program. So for example, at the end of your program, at the end of the school year, maybe you've got a summary report that you want to submit to the funder. It can show improvement charts on assignments and assignment completions, baseline learning comprehension. You could do that for a group of your fourth graders or individually, depending on what you want to share with the funder and what they would like to see. You can show pre and post year school assessments, assignment goals, methods, and recommendations. It can show specific program reports. So again, make sure that you're clear on what goals, objectives, and especially outcomes are, and being able to state that clearly in your proposal.
Emily, I have a question that somebody asked.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to answer it. The question is, what's the difference between attainable and realistic in the SMART goals?
Oh. Attainable is a smart part of the SMART goal that you think is based on what students in this example have achieved previously. So what you think they can achieve. And it's more of a stretch. Realistic is something that I guess, it's sort of repetitious. in this example, because if you're attainable, you're looking at what they've already achieved. If you think they can get their homework completion up from 80% to 90%, and and that's attainable, then go for it. Realistic might be we want to go from 80 to 85 this year. So think about, what do you think is attainable? And then what do you think is realistic based on what's already been achieved if you've got some kind of track record for this program. So it's a little fuzzy to separate the two, but I would go back to what, the history of what's already been achieved, and then look forward to, okay, this next year we're going to be reducing our objectives because we've got this pandemic that we're dealing with this year. So attainable might be just a few percentage points based on things that have happened. So I wouldn't worry about too much about the difference. So basically, and just, touching back on goals and objectives again, just one more time, you can leave this slide up, Kate, it's fine. But when you put all these things together, you put your goals together, your objectives, your outcomes, it's going to be easy for funders to see how this program is going to achieve success and the impact that this program is going to have. And that's what you want to communicate to them. You want to make it easy for them to see, okay, this is what you're doing. This is how you're going to do it. And I understand now how you're going to, measure results. Doesn't guarantee results, but this is how you're going to measure it. So evaluation, again, keep it very simple. Plug in your organization name. We'll utilize the following strategies and tools to track the successful implementation and completion of the proposed program. It may include utilize pre and post tests of attitudes, behaviors, academic achievement, learning, whatever it is that you're focused on in your program, or other standardized tests to measure, say, an increase in knowledge. Maybe you want to maintain attendance records. And so maybe with the fourth grade students who are not completing their homework or have a lower completion rate, you want to track their attendance records. And what are those reflecting? And are those going up as their completion rate is going up? Then assure the purchase installation of new equipment. And so if you're asking for equipment and you want to make sure that you can state, our objective is to install and create this new outdoor sports and play area for our students by the end of 2021. And this is what we're going to have in place. And for this, say you've gotten, oh, and I see the note from Stephanie, so thank you. I will start moving along. Say you've got a match from a funder and you need 20 laptops for the year, and you've got 10 laptops committed as a donation from a funder. You need 10 more. You want to explain that to the funder. And then you'll be able to report on that. Okay, we'll move through these pretty quickly. Organization budget. Oh, did we skip one, Kate?
But the organization budget is after sustainability plan.
Yeah.
So it goes from evaluation, then sustainability plan, and then you have your budget.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so sustainability plan can be very succinct again. Speak to beyond this particular funder. Be brief. Talk about how you're going to support this program beyond this particular request. Maybe you're going to do a GoFundMe campaign or text to give to be able to support it. Will funds create new or generate new service fees in the future? And that's one of your goals, and that's going to help support the program. So how are you going to create, and what other sources of funding are you also seeking? What other proposals are you submitting? Then organization budget. This is just know your key percentages, your individual, your corporate, your events, your grants, your state and federal funds, so that you can communicate that, show that to the funder. They're going to want to see the percentages. Where's most of your funding currently coming from? And then you can also, in your sustainability, speak to some of that. If you have a lot of your funding under state and federal, this is part of your effort to diversify your funding streams. Then your program and project budget. So this is where you want to get into showing, okay, these are all the true costs of what we're going to need. This is in-kind support that we're seeing. So again, back to the laptops. Don't forget about your overhead. So for example, cost per participant figures. This is where you want to add in. It's going to cost us $3,000 annually to serve each participant in this program. Our current budget covers 65%, showing a deficit of $1,050 per participant. And if we're going to be growing this program like we anticipate, here's our overall deficit that we're going to have. And that this is why we need the funding. So you want to explain that very clearly in your program and project budget.
Hey, Emily, can we go back for a sec?
Yep.
So what about showing funds, you know, often you have a budget, but the person you're applying for funding, when you're applying for funding, you're not expecting them to pay for every part of what's on the budget. Should you show that?
You don't really have to. I mean, they're going to know, you know, say your budget is $200K for your program and you're applying for a $15,000 grant. They're going to know that that is going to go towards part of your overall request.
Okay.
So you don't really have to show exactly, and it's a good idea to not show exactly what it's going to go for, because that gives you more flexibility. So you just want to be able to show it's going to go towards, you know, $15,000 is going to cover part of what we need to serve the number of people that we intend to serve.
Okay, thank you.
Then your narrative and justification, and again, this explains what it is you're asking for. For example, you want to provide salaries for 7 tutors who will be hired at a rate of $15 an hour to facilitate tutoring sessions Monday through Thursday, 3 to 6 p.m. during the school year. And then you want to show your calculation, $15 an hour times 12 hours a week times 40 weeks. So, and then in here, you make sure you're using language like will fund, offset the cost of, support, enable, grow. You know, just think about the language that you're using. It will help create capacity. That's another great thing that funders are going to be interested in. So again, another formula example, help offset the program coordinator part-time salary. and the calculation for that. So the review part, super important again. Have somebody review your proposal for you. Have someone take a look at it with a bird's eye view that is not familiar with the program, as familiar with the program as you are. That's very helpful. And especially if they don't have any knowledge of the program, did you really capture the vision of what you want to communicate? Will an expert in your field agree that your program is evidence-based, it's efficient, it's competitive? Does your grammar, syntax, content all mesh into a winning proposal? So check your grammar, check your spelling. I'm sure Stephanie can speak to this. You know, it doesn't create a great impression when you've got spelling errors, or you've got grammatical errors, or you've got run-on sentences and things like that. So super important to be able to review, have somebody take a look at it for you, build that time in to your whole process.
Yeah, I do want to mention, Emily, you're absolutely right. I remember, just as you said that, we got a letter of intent from an organization that it almost looked like it was a draft that they weren't supposed to send to us. It had just all sorts of errors and different fonts and, you know, typos, and it left a horrible impression because it seemed like they didn't care enough or didn't need this money enough that they spent the time to submit something appropriate. So it's an indication of your level of care and the importance of what you're applying for if it has a lot of mistakes in it.
Yep, absolutely. So at this point, I'll just check the chat and see, are there any other questions or anything that you would like me to address at this point before we start wrapping things up?
So I think everything in the chat has been addressed. And I don't know, maybe, I guess there aren't any questions.
Okay, is everybody overloaded with information, or or is it been pretty much what you needed?
Okay. So, Jeremy Stein, you have a question? Did you want to ask? Oh, Kate, can you unmute Hazan Stein?
I just enabled that you can unmute yourselves. Yes. Oh, who is it? Okay, there you go.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify some terminology. In one of the slides, you talked about goals and objectives, and then you used the word outcomes. Do you use those interchangeably, or does each one have its own connotation?
Each one has its own definition.
Okay, can you clarify?
Sure. As I mentioned, goals can be really kind of overarching. So you want to, say for example, you want to impact reading comprehension for all fourth grade students in your school. And you want them to build better comprehension skills. You want them to read and understand better. You want to improve their test scores and things like that. But goals are not specifically measurable. When you get into objectives, that's where you want to state, here's the measurement. We want to increase reading comprehension of our fourth grade students to 80% by the end of this school year. So that's a very straightforward, simple objective.
Okay.
Your outcome then is going to be, we have changed reading comprehension for these students. They have progressed this far we have shown through them being able to communicate their comprehension back to us, and assignment completion and so on.
And is the outcome an assessment of what's been done in the past, or is that after it's been done, you can show the outcomes?
That's when it's been done.
Okay.
So something forward-looking. So by given your timeline that you're going to describe in the proposal, if your timeline is by May of 21, this is what you want to be able to show by early summer of 2021. And to base that on, you can look at, okay, what has been the data the previous year for that 4th grade class? And what has been the data the year before for them as 3rd graders? And how much have they progressed? So you'll be able to show by the end of the year, this is what we want achieved.
So another way to look at outcomes is I ask myself, what's different because this happened? So it's not necessarily, 20 people were served. It's what's different because those 20 people were served. And what you can do when you think about it that way is start with the outcome. There are all sorts of models for doing this, but if you start with the outcome of what you want to be different because this donor gave you this money, then you can back up to, well, what would the change look like? What should my objective be? And, it's just another way of looking at it. Does that answer? Okay. We have another question from Rabbi Stigman. I'm sorry. I always call you Moish. So before I ask the question, I want to point out, it's a question about smaller organizations. I want to point out that what Emily's covered is a full proposal, like for a foundation, that asks for like all and everything. But a lot of when you're asking for money, these information can be used for all sorts of different size funders. I know you're talking about the size of your organization, Moish, but I just want to make this other point that some grant proposals are as small as just being a letter, like literally a letter, dear whoever the donor is. And it's that small, but all of what Emily's talked about how to present yourself, your organization in the best way, all those tips work, even if it's just a letter. And so I was feeling a little bit like I don't want people to be overwhelmed when she listed that whole list of all the different things that you might need, because for many proposals, you may never need all of that. I absolutely support what she's saying, but don't let it be overwhelming. So, so what Moish asked is for how would you modify this for organizations with smaller budgets or with less data? And then also a little bit of a different question is if you're looking for seed money. So do you want to talk about adapting for a very small budget and data first?
Sure. That's a great question. All of these components, and like you said, Stephanie, all these components can be used no matter the size of your program and your organization or the size of the funder. So if you're a smaller program that's looking for $25,000 and you want to go to a funder with an average size annual assets of 500K. So not terribly large, but typically they're not going to be as stringent in their requirements and their guidelines as, say, a corporate funder or a larger community foundation like GMF. But all these same components can be used. You may not need to include all of them, but you're going to have that information. So it's going to be much easier for you to go to larger organizations as well as smaller funders. And you're going to have that information to be able to use efficiently and much more quickly. And getting to your program, if your program is smaller, you're going to be able to show, okay, we just need $10,000, for example, and we'll be able to provide the equipment that we need for this after-school program during the school year. And that's fine. You may not need to explain and get in as much depth as some of the information that I shared today, but you just need to go by the funders' guidelines and show them the impact that they can help make. So every funder is going to want to make an impact no matter their size. And you're going to want, no matter the size of your program, you're going to need to show the impact that you're going to make for your community. That is not really going to change for any funder request. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
So one of the things that I think is really great about the way Emily has structured this workshop is that she's gonna give you an assignment, and you'll have an opportunity to get feedback on this assignment when we meet in 2 weeks. So Emily, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Basically what it is it's just an additional learning opportunity for you. And the assignment is to create, Kate, if you want to put up that slide that says assignment, it's to create an executive summary for the next program request that you are thinking about. And there we go, thanks. So create an executive summary, go back to that page that lists all the different components, put that together, gather your information, and then if you would like, we're going to have kind of like a group session to take a look at some executive summaries that have been submitted, and we can provide feedback on those. So if you would like to have an executive summary reviewed, and we will be nice, I promise. We will not be like some situations I've been in where it's been pretty ruthless going over people's writing and so on. We'll be nice. But it's a great opportunity to learn, you know, all these different components, be really clear in your writing, communicate effectively, and have people who aren't as familiar with your program kind of take a look at it and say, oh, I understand that, or maybe you want to tweak this sentence. It's not quite as clear to me. So it's going to be, I think, a really helpful exercise in being able to write an effective executive summary. And like I said, you'll be able to take this and you'll be able to use it in your future proposals. So please submit to Stephanie. Her email is up here by the 26th, your executive summary sample. We'll share, if you're willing, at the second webinar on the 28th. And also on the 28th, you know, we will talk a little bit more about applying during the time of COVID. And on this, on the last slide, I also put some resources out here for you on Grant Watch Wisconsin is a really nice resource that I like to utilize. There's a couple of really good blogs that I like, grantsforgood.com, fundingforgood.com, I love. And my email and my LinkedIn page as well on here. And we'll meet again on the 28th from 10 to 11, and we'll have some fun, and it'll be a great learning exercise, I think. So hope you take advantage.
I want to underscore that there's value, even if you don't want to share your summary. It's very, very helpful to attend because you'll learn from how Emily helps work with whoever is willing to have theirs shared. Does anyone have any other questions? If not, okay. Oh, okay. We're just having many thanks. So I want to thank every one of you for being here today, and I really look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. And I want to thank you, Emily, for sharing your expertise with us. And I think that we'll wrap up. So hope everybody has a good day and a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.